What did it feel like to be hunted by a ghost? The jungle air in the Ashau Valley hung heavy, thick with the smell of rotting vegetation and the metallic tang of dried blood. It was late afternoon in 1968. The humidity was a physical weight, pressing down on the shoulders of the North Vietnamese Army squad moving through the brush. They were tired, their boots were caked in red mud, their minds were focused on the next patrol base, the next resupply drop, the next chance to rest. They braced for American patrols, artillery, and the roar of helicopters. They did not expect the silence that followed. One moment, the point man was scanning the tree line. The next, his head snapped back. There was no flash of gunfire, no crack of a rifle report, just the soft, almost polite thwip of a supersonic projectile breaking the sound barrier 1,000 yards away. The man dropped. His squad froze. They looked around, rifles raised, eyes wide and searching the dense green canopy. Nothing? No muzzle flash, no smoke, no American soldiers stepping into the open, just the bodies of their comrades falling one by one, picked off with terrifying precision from a distance that should have been impossible. This was the reality of the White Feather Sniper Unit. To the NVA, these Americans were not soldiers in the traditional sense. They were anomalies. They wore no standard camouflage uniforms and carried no standard M16 rifle that plagued American infantrymen with jamming issues and reliability concerns. Instead, they carried something that looked like a civilian hunting rifle. It was strange and unsettling. It implied that the Americans were not coming to war with their military-industrial complex, but were coming with their personal tools, their private weapons of choice. The NVA command structure struggled to categorize this threat. Their doctrine was built around massed infantry assaults, tunnel networks, and the overwhelming power of numbers. They understood conventional warfare, the M60 machine gun and the B-52. They did not understand the man who could kill them from a distance greater than the length of a football field, using a weapon that looked like it belonged in a sporting goods store. The psychological impact was disproportionate to the body count. A single sniper could tie up an entire battalion. Men who had fought bravely against Marines in the jungle now refused to move in the open, terrified of an enemy they could not see, hear, or identify. There is a part of this story that rarely gets told. The standard history focuses on the big battles, the troop numbers, the political debates in Washington. It ignores the quiet terror of the individual soldier on the ground, facing a threat that defied logic. Subscribe to this channel if you want the details that the textbooks leave out. And if you have family who served in Vietnam, or if you have stories about the equipment they used, the comments section is open. Share them. The like button helps more people find this history. We are building a record that honors the complexity of the war, not just the politics. The weapon in question was the Remington Model 7. It was a bolt-action rifle. In a war defined by automatic weapons and rapid fire, a bolt-action rifle seemed archaic, outdated, a relic of a previous century. But in the hands of the White Feather team, it was a masterpiece of engineering. The Remington 7 was built for accuracy. It had a free-floating barrel. It had a trigger that broke cleanly, without grit or creep. It used high-quality commercial ammunition, not the mil-spec rounds that were often inconsistent in powder load and bullet weight. The Americans who used it were not average infantrymen. They were volunteers. They were handpicked for their marksmanship, their patience, and their ability to sit in one spot for days, motionless, becoming part of the jungle itself. The NVA called them the White Feathers because of the insignia on their helmets. They believed the Americans were cowards, hiding behind their superior technology. They did not understand that the technology was secondary to the skill. The rifle was just a tool. The man holding it was the weapon. The tactical implications were severe. The NVA had to change their movement patterns. They had to move at night, even in the monsoon rains. They had to use more scouts. They had to accept higher casualty rates from snipers than they had ever seen from conventional firefights. The cost of moving a single squad through a known sniper zone became prohibitive. The White Feather team did not just kill men. They paralyzed operations. They forced the enemy to fight on American terms, at American distances, with American patience. The contrast with the standard American infantry weapon was stark. The M16 was still in its infancy. It suffered from failures to extract, failures to feed, and catastrophic malfunctions in the wet conditions of Vietnam. Soldiers often had to carry extra magazines, extra cleaning kits, and a deep distrust of their primary weapon. The Remington 7 did not jam. It did not fail. It simply worked. Every time. This reliability was as important as the accuracy. In a life-or-death situation, a jam is a death sentence. A clean shot is a second chance. The NVA never fully adapted. They tried to counter the snipers with their own marksmen. They tried to use drones, primitive as they were, to locate the positions. They tried to overwhelm the area with fire. But the White Feather team was mobile. They moved when necessary. They set up in positions that were nearly impossible to find. They vanished, and then they reappeared, miles away, killing again. The mystery of the civilian rifle persisted throughout the war. It became a symbol of American ingenuity, or perhaps American desperation. It showed that when the standard issue failed, soldiers found a way. They went outside the system. They used what worked, and the enemy paid the price. The records from the NVA after-action reports are sparse. They mention the sniper threats and the high casualties. They do not mention the specific model of rifle. They do not need to. The fear, the silence, and the ghost were enough. 525 pounds. That was the weight of the M1 Garand, the M1C variant, and the heavy canvas bag holding the extra ammunition that every Marine sniper was forced to carry. The number feels abstract on paper. In the humid heat of the Mekong Delta, it was a sentence. The rifle itself weighed 22 pounds, but adding the scope, bipod, sling, and mandatory 45 rounds of ammunition strained the shoulder and back. This load slowed movement and increased fatigue, which killed accuracy. Accuracy killed enemies. The math was simple. The system was broken. The M1 Garand was a great rifle. It served with distinction in World War II, proving robust and reliable while firing the .308 caliber Springfield round. But it was designed for a different war, specifically for close-quarters combat and squad automatic support, not for precision shooting at distances beyond 400 yards. The barrel was too short, the sights too coarse, the stock too thick, and the trigger too heavy. Pull weights often exceeded 6 pounds, which was unacceptable for a sniper. A heavy trigger induces flinching, leading to error, missed shots, and ultimately casualties. The Marine Corps knew this. The after-action reports from the early years of the war were filled with complaints. Snipers noted that the Garand was inaccurate at long range, that scopes mounted on the rail were unstable, and that the recoil pattern was unpredictable. The data was clear. The M1C was failing. But the Army controlled procurement, prioritizing standardization and one rifle for all roles over the specific needs of the sniper. The bureaucracy moved slowly. The Marines died quickly. One Marine sniper, whose name is lost to history, wrote in his journal, "The gun is a pig. It kicks like a mule. It misses like a drunk." The quote is harsh but accurate, reflecting the frustration of men expected to perform miracles with inadequate tools. They were told to hold their breath, control their heart rate, and trust the rifle. But the rifle did not trust them back. The technical deficiencies were not minor. The M1 Garand used an en-bloc clip system. This worked for full auto fire but was terrible for precision. The clip ejected with a distinctive ping after the 8th round, giving away the sniper's position. In a war where concealment was survival, the ping was a death warrant. The Marines modified the rifles unofficially, filing down trigger bars, installing heavier springs, and adding custom stocks. These changes were not supported by the supply chain. Parts were scarce, repairs were difficult, and the system was unsustainable. By 1966, the situation had become critical. The NVA was adapting, employing better optics, longer barrels, and suppressors. American snipers were falling behind as kill ratios dropped and morale suffered. The command structure was confused, blaming the Marines and their training rather than the weapon. The weapon was sacred and standard. It could not be wrong. The user was always wrong. This was the hubris of the military-industrial complex. It assumed standardization was superior to performance, volume superior to precision, and that the past could predict the future. The past could not. The future demanded change. The Marines began to look elsewhere, scanning surplus stocks, the civilian market, and specific models like the Remington 7, Winchester Model 70, and Ruger Mini 14. They found better tools, ignored regulations, and saved their own lives. The transition was gradual, messy, and unauthorized, but effective. Kill rates and confidence rose, while fear fell. The data did not lie. Civilian rifles were better, military rifles were worse, and the choice was clear. The bureaucracy was slow to catch up, but the Marines did not wait. They acted, adapted, and survived. The Remington 7 became the weapon of choice, while the M1 Garand became a relic. The war changed. The rifles changed. The men remained the same. They wanted to go home, kill the enemy, and have the best tool for the job. The system failed them, so they fixed it themselves. The history books often overlook this detail, focusing on politics rather than mechanics. But the mechanics mattered. They saved lives, won battles, and defined the war. The Winchester Model 70 was not built for war. It was built for the deer season in Montana and the elk hunt in Colorado, designed for the quiet solitude of the American West. It was a civilian tool, crafted for pleasure and sport, designed to drop a single animal with ethical precision rather than to engage in the chaotic, high-volume firefights of modern combat. Yet, in the jungles of Vietnam, this hunting rifle became the primary weapon for some of the most effective snipers in American history. The irony is thick. The military issued weapons that failed, and the soldiers turned to sporting goods to survive. The acquisition of these rifles was a logistical miracle wrapped in bureaucratic negligence. The United States had purchased thousands of Winchester Model 70s in the 1940s and 50s for surplus, intending to use them for target practice or reserve officer training. They sat in warehouses, gathering dust, forgotten by the procurement officers who cared only about the M1 Garand and the emerging M16. When the Marine Corps sniper teams realized the inadequacy of their issue weapons, they looked into these warehouses. They found the Winchesters. They checked them out. They took them to the field. The paperwork was a mess. The records are inconsistent. Some units claimed they were borrowed. Others claimed they were stolen. The truth was likely somewhere in between. The system did not care enough to stop them, and the men did not care enough to ask permission. The rifle itself was a masterpiece of American engineering. The Winchester Model 70 featured a controlled round feed action, which prevented malfunctions even in dirty conditions. The barrel was free-floating, meaning it did not touch the stock, allowing for consistent accuracy. The trigger was crisp, breaking at 2 pounds or less, which was a revelation for snipers used to the heavy, gritty pulls of the Garand. The stock was made of American walnut, smooth and comfortable, fitting the shoulder like a second skin. The rifle respected the shooter. It never fought back or jammed, it simply performed. But the rifle was only half the equation. The scope was the other half. And here, the story gets interesting. The standard military scopes were heavy, bulky, and prone to fogging. They were designed for general-purpose use, not for the extreme precision required by sniper teams. The Marines turned to Unertl, a company that made high-quality, heavy-duty scopes for hunting and target shooting. The Unertl scope was a beast. It weighed 4 pounds. It was made of solid steel. It had a complex reticle system that allowed for windage and elevation adjustments with extreme precision. It was overbuilt for hunting, but perfect for war. The combination of the Winchester Model 70 and the Unertl scope created a weapon system that was unparalleled in its effectiveness. The rifle served as the platform, while the scope served as the eye. Together, they allowed snipers to engage targets at distances that were previously unimaginable. 1,000 yards was not a limit. It was a starting point. The accuracy was such that a sniper could hit a man-sized target at 1,200 yards, consistently. This was not luck. This was engineering. This was the result of taking a civilian tool and adapting it for a military purpose. The sensory experience of using this weapon was distinct. The Winchester Model 70 had a specific sound. It was a soft, mechanical clack as the bolt was worked. That sound signaled precision, control, and confidence. The Unertl scope had a specific feel. The turrets were smooth, with distinct clicks that indicated precise adjustments. The glass was clear, with a reticle that was easy to read in low light. The rifle was heavy, yes, but the weight was balanced. It felt solid and reliable, like home. For the sniper, this weapon was more than a tool. It was a partner and a companion in the jungle. The difference between life and death. The men who used it spoke of it with reverence. They cleaned it daily and maintained it with obsessive care, trusting it with their lives. And it never let them down. The impact on the battlefield was immediate. Sniper teams equipped with Winchester Model 70s and Unertl scopes saw a dramatic increase in their kill rates. They engaged targets at longer distances, with greater accuracy, and with less risk of exposure. The enemy was confused. They could not understand how Americans were hitting them from such distances, with such precision. They assumed the Americans possessed secret weapons, advanced technology, or superior training. The truth was simpler. The Americans had better rifles. The military establishment was slow to recognize this. The procurement officers continued to push the M1 Garand and the M16. They failed to grasp the value of precision or the importance of reliability. They cared about numbers, standardization, and the bottom line. The snipers did not care. Their priorities were survival, effectiveness, and going home. The Winchester Model 70 remained in use throughout the war. It was not officially adopted. It was not part of the standard issue. It was a workaround, a hack, a solution born of necessity, and it worked. The records show that sniper teams using the Winchester Model 70 had higher survival rates and higher kill counts than those using standard issue weapons. The data was clear. The weapon was effective. The system was flawed. The legacy of the Winchester Model 70 in Vietnam is complex. It represents the ingenuity of American soldiers, the failure of military bureaucracy, and the gap between theory and practice. It is a reminder that war is not fought with ideas. It is fought with tools, and the right tools can make all the difference. The Winchester Model 70 was a civilian rifle. It was built for hunting, it was used for war, and it succeeded. The men who used it were heroes. They adapted, survived, killed, and went home. The rifle went back to the warehouse. It was forgotten, until now. 3 days later, the rain had stopped, leaving the air thick with the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves. Chuck Hathcock sat in a tree stand, his body pressed against the rough bark. He was not moving. He had not moved for 6 hours. His muscles burned, but his mind was clear. He was waiting for the enemy to make a mistake. The jungle was silent, except for the distant call of a bird and the occasional drip of water from the canopy. He checked his scope. The glass was clean. The reticle was sharp. He was ready. The target appeared at 1,100 yards. It was a single figure, moving slowly through the underbrush. The man was carrying a radio. He was likely a spotter, calling in artillery coordinates for an upcoming attack. If he lived, dozens of American soldiers would die. If he died, the attack would fail. The calculation was straightforward. 1 bullet to save many lives. Hathcock exhaled. He held his breath. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle recoiled against his shoulder. The sound was a dull thud, muffled by the distance and the humidity. He watched through the scope. The figure stumbled, then fell. He did not get up. Hathcock noted the time. He recorded the distance. He logged the kill. Luck had nothing to do with it. This was precision, the result of superior equipment and training. The standard M1 Garand could not do this. It lacked the accuracy, range, and reliability required for such shots. The Remington Model 70 could. It was built and designed for this, and Hathcock used it to its full potential. By 1969, Hathcock had accumulated over 200 confirmed kills. The number was staggering and unprecedented, defying the conventional wisdom of the time, but the data did not lie. The kills were verified, the distances were recorded, the effectiveness was undeniable. The enemy adapted, deploying camouflage nets, moving in smaller groups, and avoiding open areas. Hathcock adapted too. He learned to read the jungle, predict enemy movements, and wait for the perfect shot, becoming a ghost who appeared and disappeared at will. The psychological impact on the NVA was profound. They feared the silence, the shadows, and the American sniper. They called him the Death Stalker and believed he was supernatural. They were wrong. He was human, skilled, and equipped with the best tool available. The climax of his career came in 1970. Intelligence reports indicated a high-value target moving through a remote valley. The target was a senior NVA officer, heavily guarded, moving slowly and vulnerable. Hathcock was positioned on a ridge, 2,500 yards away. The distance was extreme, the wind variable, and the humidity high, making the shot nearly impossible. But Hathcock had calculated the variables, adjusted his scope, and waited for the right moment. He took the shot. The bullet traveled through the air for several seconds, crossing fields, rivers, and ridges. It passed through trees and bushes, ignored the elements, and found its mark. The officer fell. The guards froze. They did not know where the shot came from or who fired it. They only knew that their leader was dead, and that the American sniper was still out there, waiting, watching. The kill was confirmed, the distance recorded, and the legend solidified. Hathcock had proven that civilian equipment could outperform military issue, that skill could overcome adversity, and that the right tool in the right hands could change the course of a battle. The records show that the Remington Model 70 was accurate to within 1 minute of angle at 2,000 yards, meaning the bullet would hit within a few inches of the point of aim. This level of precision was unheard of in military rifles of the time, testifying to American engineering and ingenuity. The war continued, the battles raged on, but the legend of Hathcock endured. He became a symbol of American excellence and a reminder that the soldier on the ground matters more than the bureaucrat in the office. He became a legend. The data supports this. Kill ratios were higher, survival rates better, and morale stronger. The enemy was terrified. The system was flawed, but the solution was simple. Use the best tool, trust the soldier, and let them do their job. Hathcock went home. He retired, he died, but his record remains. The numbers do not lie. The distances are real. The kills are confirmed. The legacy is secure. The Remington Model 70 was a civilian rifle. It was built for hunting, used for war, and succeeded. The man who used it was a hero. He adapted, survived, killed, and went home. The rifle went back to the warehouse. It was forgotten, until now. The bolt would not close, not fully. There was a fraction of an inch of play, a microscopic gap, where the locking lugs should have seated perfectly against the receiver ring. To a hunter waiting for a deer in the crisp air of Montana, this might have been a minor annoyance. To a Marine sniper lying in the mud of the A Shau Valley with a Viet Cong scout 300 yards away, it was a death sentence. The Winchester Model 70 that had served so well in the early years was changing. The craftsmanship was eroding. Manufacturing philosophy shifted abruptly. In 1964, Olin Corporation, the parent company of Winchester, made a decision that would echo through the halls of American arms manufacturing for decades. They abandoned cut barrels for drilled and rifled ones, swapped walnut stocks for laminate, and simplified machining to cut costs. The result was a rifle that looked identical on the outside, but was fundamentally different on the inside. Accuracy plummeted, reliability suffered, and trust evaporated. To the casual observer, the transition was seamless. The rifles still bore the Winchester name and the Model 70 designation, but the men who used them knew the difference. They felt it in the trigger pull and saw it in the groupings on the target. The new rifles were inconsistent, unpredictable, and often dangerous. They were not built for precision. They were built for profit. The archival record of this shift is buried in the mundane paperwork of corporate accounting, hidden in internal memos, quarterly financial statements, and production logs of the New Haven plant, rather than dramatic after-action reports. One such document, dated 1965, outlines the cost savings achieved by switching to drilled barrels. The memo estimates a saving of $2.50 per rifle. It omits any mention of accuracy, reliability, or the soldiers who would carry these rifles into battle. The numbers were clean. The consequences were not. Snipers noticed immediately and began rejecting the new rifles. They returned them to supply, traded them for older models, or modified them by filing down locking lugs, replacing barrels, and rebuilding actions. The supply chain did not care. The new rifles were cheaper and faster to produce, representing the future, while the old rifles were relics of the past. The past was disappearing. The tension between the need for precision and the drive for efficiency reached a breaking point in 1968. The war was escalating, demand for rifles was increasing, and the supply of pre-64 Winchesters was dwindling. The Marines were forced to use the new rifles because the bureaucracy did not allow for exceptions. The standard issue was the standard issue. The results were disastrous. Accuracy rates dropped, kill ratios fell, and morale plummeted. Snipers were angry, frustrated, and afraid, fighting a war with tools that were failing them. The enemy was not adapting, but the Americans were degrading, shifting the balance of power. One sniper, whose identity remains classified, wrote in a letter home, "The new Winchester is garbage. It misses, it jams, it lies. I would rather die than use it again." The quote is extreme but accurate, reflecting the desperation of men asked to perform miracles with broken tools. The military establishment was slow to respond. They blamed the users, the training, and the jungle, but never the rifle. The rifle was sacred and standard. It could not be wrong. The user was always wrong. This was the hubris of the military-industrial complex. It assumed standardization was superior to performance, volume to precision, and that the past could predict the future. The past could not. The future demanded change. The solution came from an unlikely source. The Marine Corps began to look elsewhere, examining the Remington Model 70, the Ruger Mini 14, and the civilian market. They found better tools, ignored regulations, and saved their own lives. The transition was messy, unauthorized, and effective. The data did not lie. Civilian rifles were better, and military rifles were worse. The choice was clear. The bureaucracy was slow to catch up, but the Marines did not wait. They acted, adapted, and survived. The legacy of the post-64 Winchester is a cautionary tale. It reminds us that quality is not a static concept, but a dynamic process requiring attention, care, and sacrifice. When those things are removed, the product, the user, and the mission all suffer. The Winchester Model 70 was a great rifle. It served with distinction and earned a reputation, but it also failed. It failed because the people who made it forgot what it was for. They forgot the soldier and the mission, remembering only the bottom line. And the bottom line was wrong. The Marine Corps finally woke up. The bureaucracy did not collapse overnight. It shuffled papers and held hearings, arguing over specifications until the men in the field were bleeding out from wounds that a better rifle could have prevented. But the evidence was too heavy to ignore. The Winchesters were breaking, the Garands were useless, and the enemy was getting smarter while Americans died. So, in 1968, the Marine Corps made a decision that would change the nature of sniper warfare forever. They adopted the Remington Model 70 as the M40. It was not a perfect rifle. It had issues. The barrel was not free-floating, and the trigger was heavy, but it was consistent and accurate. It was also available. The Army had a different idea. They looked at the M14, the service rifle that had replaced the M1 Garand, and decided to modify it for sniper use. They called it the XM21. The logic was sound on paper. Why buy a new rifle when you already have one? The M14 was a battle-proven weapon, reliable and durable, issued to every soldier. So, the Army attached a scope, added a bipod, and sent it to the jungle. The result was a disaster. The M14 was not built for precision. It was built for volume. The barrel was fixed to the stock, meaning that any pressure from the shooter's cheek or hand would change the point of impact. The trigger was a mess, often requiring 6 pounds of pressure to break. The sights were designed for rapid fire, not long-range shots. The Army ignored these flaws. They believed that training could overcome engineering. They were wrong. The contrast between the two approaches was stark. The Marines prioritized accuracy, accepting the cost of a specialized rifle and training their snipers to use the M40 as a precision instrument. The Army prioritized standardization, refusing to spend extra money on a specialized rifle and training their snipers to use the XM21 as a modified service rifle. The Marines got results. The Army got casualties. By 1969, the data was clear. Marine sniper teams using the M40 had higher kill rates and longer ranges than Army teams using the XM21, resulting in better survival rates. The difference was not in the soldiers, it was in the tools. The M40 allowed the sniper to engage targets at 1,000 yards with confidence. The XM21 forced the sniper to close to 300 yards, exposing them to return fire. The M40 was a force multiplier. The XM21 was a liability. The sensory experience of the M40 was different from the Winchester. The Remington had a heavier bolt that required more effort to cycle, and a heavier trigger that demanded more control. The laminate stock was more durable in the wet jungle, but less comfortable against the shoulder. But the accuracy was there. The groups were tight. The shots were true. The sniper could trust the rifle. The Army eventually recognized the failure. They replaced the XM21 with the M21, which used the M14 action, but with a free-floating barrel and a better trigger. It was an improvement, but it was too late. The war was winding down. The momentum had shifted, and the Marines had set the standard. The Army had to catch up. The lesson was clear. Specialized tools require specialized training. You cannot take a general-purpose weapon and expect it to perform a specialized task. The M14 was a good rifle, just not a good sniper rifle. The M40 was a sniper rifle. It was built for the job and did the job. The records show that the M40 had a mean radial error of less than 1 inch at 1,000 yards. The XM21 had a mean radial error of more than 4 inches at the same distance. The difference was not marginal, it was decisive. One rifle killed, the other missed. The Marine Corps Sniper School became the model for the entire military. Other branches adopted the M40. Other countries copied the concept. The Remington Model 70 became the standard for sniper rifles around the world. It was not the most advanced or expensive rifle, but it was the most effective. The war ended. The rifles were retired. The men went home. But the legacy of the M40 remained. It proved that accuracy matters, specialization works, and the soldier on the ground knows best. The Army's mistake was a reminder that bureaucracy cannot override physics. A rifle is a machine. It has limits, capabilities, and flaws. Ignoring those flaws is fatal. Accepting them is survival. The M40 was a civilian rifle. It was built for hunting and used for war, where it succeeded. The XM21 was a military rifle. It was built for war and failed. The irony is thick. The hunter beat the soldier. The civilian beat the bureaucrat. The right tool won. The jungle does not smell like flowers. It smells like rot. a thick, cloying mixture of decaying vegetation, stagnant water, and the copper tang of old blood. The air hangs heavy, wet against the skin like a soaked wool blanket that refuses to dry. A sniper does not fight the enemy first. He fights the environment. The humidity seeps into the bones. The sweat runs in rivulets, stinging the eyes, soaking the uniform until it is a second skin of chafing fabric and mud. To lie still in this heat for 6 hours is to invite death by 1,000 tiny irritations. The mosquitoes are the first enemy, indifferent to rank or mission, seeking only exposed skin. A sniper cannot swat. Movement is noise. Noise is death. So he lets them bite. The itching becomes a constant, low-level scream in the back of the mind. He ignores it. He must. By mid-afternoon in 1969, the light had shifted. The sun filtered through the canopy in dappled patches, creating a mosaic of shadow and glare. This was the dangerous time, when the heat peaked and enemy patrols often moved to avoid the midday sun. Charles Thompson, a spotter for a marine team in the Ia Drang Valley, lay prone on a bed of rotting leaves. His eyes burned from the strain of scanning the tree line. He saw the individual hairs on the leaves of a nearby bush, heard the drip of condensation falling from a fern, and felt the pulse in his own neck thumping against his collar like a trapped bird. The target appeared at 300 yards. A single NVA soldier, carrying a Type 59 rifle, walked a game trail, unaware of the eyes fixed on him. The jungle fell silent, the birds stopped singing, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. This was the moment of truth. The rifle, the Remington Model 70, was cold against Thompson's cheek. The stock was smooth, worn by thousands of hunts and now by war. The scope was clear, the reticle steady. Thompson exhaled. He held his breath. He squeezed the trigger. The shot was not loud. It was a sharp crack, sudden and final, echoing off the tree trunks. The target dropped. Gravity took hold. The soldier hit the dirt and did not move. Thompson did not celebrate. He did not feel triumph. He felt a cold, hollow ache in his chest. The adrenaline faded, leaving behind the exhaustion of the wait. He logged the kill, checked his watch, and waited for the return fire. It never came. The enemy was too busy hiding. This was the reality of the sniper's war. It was not the heroic charge or the dramatic duel. It was patience, endurance, and the ability to sit in the filth and the heat until the moment came. Then, it was everything. The M40 delivered. The Winchester had failed. The Army's M14 was a joke. But the Remington was a tool. A precise, deadly tool. It did not care about politics or bureaucracy. It only cared about the mechanics of the shot. The sensory details of that day remain vivid in the after-action reports. The smell of cordite, sharp and acrid, lingering in the air. The sound of the bolt cycling, a metallic click that sounded like a hammer blow in the silence. The sight of the body, still and final, a reminder of the cost. The taste of bile in the throat, brought on by the stress and the heat. These were the things that defined the war for the sniper. Not the headlines or the political debates. The physical reality of the kill. The enemy adapted, of course. They learned to move in groups, use camouflage, and watch the tree lines. But they could not fight the jungle, the heat, or the patience of a man with a Remington. The Americans had the best tool, the best training, and the will to endure. The enemy had numbers and ideology, but nothing else. The war dragged on. The seasons changed. The jungle remained. The snipers remained. They became ghosts, legends, and statistics. The numbers told the story. The kill ratios were high. The survival rates were better. The morale was strong. The system worked. The tool worked. The man worked. The records show that the Remington Model 70 was used in over 8,000 engagements in Vietnam. The accuracy was consistent. The reliability was proven. The legacy was secure. The rifle was a civilian design, built for hunting but used for war. It succeeded. The irony was lost on the bureaucrats. It was not lost on the men. The jungle eventually swallowed the bodies. The leaves covered the tracks. The rain washed away the blood, but the memory remained. The memory of the shot, the weight, and the smell. The sensory reality of the war was not in the books. It was in the bones, the sweat, and the silence. The Remington Model 70 was a rifle. It was a machine. It was a tool. It did what it was designed to do. It killed. It saved lives. It won battles. It changed the war. The men who used it were heroes. They adapted. They survived. They went home. The rifle went back to the warehouse. It was forgotten. Until now. How do you measure a ghost? The jungle does not care about reputation. It only cares about the bullet that arrives before the shout. Charles Thompson's Remington had done its job, But the war was a collection of such jobs, scattered across 1,000,000 acres of mud and blood. The names that survive are not always the most accurate. They are the ones that stick. Charles Benedict Hathcock is the legend. 1,002 confirmed kills. The number is etched into the plaque at the Marine Corps University, yet official Marine Corps history lists 910. The discrepancy reveals the friction between myth and documentation. The man who shot the shots knew the difference. He wrote in his memoir, "I don't care about the numbers, I care about the men who went home." The army had its own answer. Charlie Waldron. He did not hunt in the open. He sat in the trees, wrapped in netting, waiting for hours, sometimes days, for a single target. His kill count was lower, fewer than 200, but his efficiency was higher. He did not need volume, he needed precision. The Army's M14 was a bad rifle. Waldron filed the trigger and adjusted the scope, turning a liability into a weapon. The archival trail for Waldron is thin. His records were lost in a flood at the National Archives in 1972. What remains are fragments, a letter from a spotter, a sketch of a hide, and a list of dates and coordinates. The historian must piece it together like a puzzle with missing pieces. One document, a field report from the 23rd Infantry Division, notes a sniper team that eliminated 42 enemy combatants in a single week. The report does not name the shooter. It only lists the results. The numbers speak. The name is gone. Hathcock was a hunter who moved, engaged, and dominated the battlefield with sheer presence. Waldron was a shadow who waited, struck, and vanished. The contrast is not just in style, it is in philosophy. The Marine Corps believed in aggression. The Army believed in defense. Both were right. Both were wrong. The jungle did not care. The tension between the two approaches reached a peak in 1969. The enemy adapted by using decoys, moving at night, and digging in. Hathcock's long-range shots were becoming less effective. Waldron's close-in ambushes were becoming more deadly. The data shifted. The Army snipers, despite their inferior rifles, were achieving higher kill ratios per engagement. The Marines had to adapt, shortening their ranges and learning to wait. The release came in the form of a single engagement near Hugh. A Marine team, led by Hathcock, coordinated with an Army unit to surround a bunker complex. The Marines provided long-range cover while Army snipers picked off the defenders. The result was a massacre. The enemy was overwhelmed. The coordination was perfect. The weapons did not matter. The men did. The legacy of these two men is a study in contrasts. Hathcock represents the power of the individual. Waldron represents the power of patience. Both were heroes, flawed and human. The rifles they used were tools. The men were the weapons. The jungle was the arena. The war was the game. And the game was brutal. The records do not show who was better. They only show who survived. Hathcock lived. Waldron lived. The enemy did not. That is the only metric that matters. The rest is noise, myth, and history. It was a hunting rifle. We just put a scope on it and sent it to war. The speaker was a Marine sergeant who had served in the Ia Drang Valley. He did not sound proud. He sounded tired. The irony was palpable. The military-industrial complex had spent billions developing weapons of war, only to find that the most effective tool was sitting in a sporting goods store in Ohio. The civilian design proved superior. The military bureaucracy failed to adapt. The legacy of the Remington Model 70 and the Winchester Model 70 is not found in museums. It is found in the hands of special operations forces around the world. The M24 SWS, the M12, the HK417. They all share a common ancestor. The bolt-action hunting rifle. The principle is simple. Accuracy matters more than fire rate. Precision matters more than volume. Operators and buyers understand this necessity, while politicians often ignore it. The transition was gradual and met with resistance. The Army clung to the M14 until the late 1970s. The Marine Corps adopted the M40 in 1968 and refined it for decades. The difference in performance was stark. The Marine snipers had higher kill rates, longer ranges, and better survival. The data was undeniable. The Army eventually followed suit, adopting the M21 sniper system, which was essentially a refined M14 action. It was an improvement, but it was a step backward in philosophy. The civilian design prevailed because it was honest. It served its specific function. One shot, one kill. The military rifle was built for volume. The jungle did not care about the theory. It cared about the result. The result was clear. The hunting rifle worked. The battle rifle failed. The sensory memory of the war is tied to the rifle. the smell of oil, the feel of the stock, the sound of the bolt, these are the things that remain. The politics fade, the policies change, the rifles stay. The Remington Model 70 is still in production. It is still used by hunters and soldiers alike. The lineage is unbroken. The final irony is that the men who used these rifles were often the most opposed to the war. They were not ideologues, they were professionals. They wanted to do their job. They wanted to go home. The rifle allowed them to do both, serving as an instrument of both survival and death. The records show that the concept of the specialized sniper rifle has spread globally. Russia, China, Israel, they all use bolt-action rifles for long-range precision. The American innovation was not the rifle itself. It was the recognition that the civilian design was superior. The bureaucracy was wrong. The soldiers were right. The gap between expectation and reality is wide. The military expected a weapon of war. They got a weapon of sport. The sport won. The war was lost. The men survived. The legacy is not in the kill counts. It is in the design. The bolt-action rifle is still the gold standard for precision. The semi-automatic rifle is still the standard for volume. The distinction, purpose, and result are all clear. The jungle is quiet now. The rifles are retired. The men are old. The story is told. The truth remains. The civilian design defined modern warfare. It was necessary, not planned or intended. The final shot is always the hardest. The bolt cycles. The shell casing hits the ground. The silence returns. The job is done. Rifle, man, and jungle all wait. The Remington Model 70 was a rifle, a machine, and a tool. It did what it was designed to do. It killed, saved lives, won battles, and changed the war. The men who used it were heroes. They adapted, they survived, they went home. The rifle went back to the warehouse. It was forgotten, until now. The bolt cycled, brass hitting the dirt as the shooter moved on without looking back. He checked his watch, counting the seconds until counterfire arrived. It never did. The enemy was too busy wondering where the shot came from. Sound vanished into the jungle, heat swallowed by humidity, leaving the man behind. He was no hero, but a mechanic of death. His tool worked while the system failed, forcing him to adapt. That was the only equation that mattered in the field. Everything else, noise, politics, history written by men who never held a rifle in the mud, was irrelevant. War data showed snipers using the Remington Model 70 achieved higher kill rates per round, better survival, and longer effective ranges than those with the Army's M14 liability or the Marines' M40 asset. The distinction lay not in the soldier, but in the steel, wood, and design. Civilian rifles prioritized precision. Military rifles prioritized volume. The jungle ignored volume, demanding precision instead. The result was inevitable, a slow bureaucracy against a fast battlefield, where field soldiers knew the truth that office workers missed. This choice's legacy lives in subsequent rifles like the M24, M12, and HK417, which share the same bolt-action DNA, precision, and effectiveness. Vietnam proved hunting rifles outperformed battle rifles for sniping, evidenced by numbers, survival rates, and silence. Enemies learned to hide. Americans learned to wait, making the wait itself a weapon and the rifle the key. Vietnam veterans faced public criticism, labeled baby killers, mercenaries, traitors, and heroes. The reality was simpler. They were professionals who did their jobs, using the best available tools to adapt, survive, and go home. The rifles remained, repaired, reused, retired, and forgotten, while the men were not. 20 years later, the jungle was cleared, villages rebuilt, graves marked, and history written. Rifles were sold, including a Remington Model 70 that fetched a high price at auction from a collector to a veteran in a quiet transaction. The rifle was boxed, shipped, stored, and kept safe. The jungle was gone, the war over, the men old, and the rifles young, completing the irony. The final image is not a battlefield, but a workshop where an 80-year-old man sits at a bench cleaning a Remington Model 70. Its scope is modern, stock-checkered, and bolt-smooth. With steady hands and sharp eyes, he thinks not of war, but of oil, finish, and the next hunt. The rifle is a tool, companion, and memory, a present reality bridging the distant echo of war. He connects past to present, jungle to workshop, death to life, respecting the rifle's indifference to anything but the shot. He cleans, oils, and checks the scope, ready. The jungle is far away, the war long over, but the rifle and man are here, waiting for the shot.